Welcome home. We are WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive AM 1570. We're around this week, and we're certainly going to be around next week doing something that we hope you contribute to. It's going to be it's our cause. I've decided I'm going to be a cause guy around here. If I can't be a real media member, I'll be a cause guy. We're doing our little Jerry Lewis marathon, telethon, radiothon, thingathon. We're calling it Crabcake Row, a cup of soup or bowl. It begins next Monday. Begins on Monday at Lexington Market. On Tuesday, we're going to take it to Dundalk to Costas. On Wednesday, we're coming back to Lauraville and Coco's, where I'll be having the coconut shrimp with Mike Rosigliano, who is my co-host with a K on Wednesday. On Thursday, we will be at State Fair in Catonsville. And then on Friday at Pappas, world-famous crab cakes, we're going to be at the Cockeysville location because I think big, Luke Jones, and I thought big ahead of time that this fun little crab cake row, a cup of Super Bowl, because Chad Steele has said that WNST is ineligible for being a real radio station on Radio Row after 30 years in Las Vegas. I figured we'd do something good. So what we're going to do is we're going to do this for the Maryland Food Bank. We are going to offer you a free cup of soup or bowl of soup all week long, and they have great crab soup at all 5 locations. Great Maryland crab, great creamy crab. You get half and half it. They might even make some chicken noodle on the side if you're not into crab. I don't know, but you bring out something cool for the Maryland Food Bank, and we give you a cup of Super Bowl of soup. And thought we'd be talking about the Ravens in the Super Bowl. I thought it'd be a Purple Pep rally. I thought I'd be paying for a free junket in Las Vegas, Nevada for Luke Jones to hang out at the Luxor and roll the dice and be a real media guy. And you know what's funny about all of this? And this is a total shoot interview right now with you, Luke. You don't love traveling and being in hotel rooms in Las Vegas for days at a time. So I don't know. It's not your gig. And I tried to explain that to Chad Steele when I tried to explain why I cover the road games and you cover the home games because you work enough. And I know John Keller last week wants you to co-host every segment with me here to do your job and my job and our jobs. It is an amazing thing that Chad Steele has banned my radio station, poisoned our name with the National Football League, but we're going to be doing something good next week, and I'm putting your ass to work either way, so you're going to have to come out and eat crab cakes and eat free soup. So what do you think of that?
Oh, crab cakes and free crab soup, man, that sounds like a tough gig right there, Ness.
Vegas is nice this time of year, I must say. You know, I have not canceled the flight, and you still have a room, and it's pretty cheap next week. So if you just want to go out there and run around with the 49ers and run around with Patrick Mahomes, this is your big opportunity, man.
I think I'm okay.
See, that I wanted you to say that out loud because people don't believe that. Like, I really would send you and say, dude, why don't you just go? I got the room. It's a couple $100. You got a flight. Why don't you just go? And you'd be like, I don't really want to go to Las Vegas because, like, especially if the Ravens aren't playing there.
I was just gonna say, if the Ravens were there, great. But I mean, there's only so many different ways you could say Patrick Mahomes is great, right? I mean, we spent the entire Monday morning commiserating about not being able to beat the Chiefs, and I mean, they're back there. I said it last week in talking about this game. And I even said this on, doing lots of out of town phone hits, everyone wanting to talk about the Ravens and, how they sizing up Kansas City and how they matched up and all that. And I even said, couldn't tell you how many years we would talk about the demise of the Patriots. And not when I say we, anyone that wasn't a Patriots fan talked about the demise of the Patriots. Brady's starting to look like he's not the best anymore. And the Patriots look like they're on their way down. And lo and behold, every year, Radio Row, more often than not every year, but
we're staring at his ass in a white.
We're looking at Tom Brady up on the banner.
Right. Yes,
yeah. I mean, and Mahomes and the Chiefs are the same thing now. I mean,
and there's Garoppolo, and there's Goff, and there's Matt Ryan. All the guys who got their ass kicked, literally, right? Yeah. Every one of them.
Yeah, and now it's it's the same thing, only with Mahomes. So, long story short, I won't be in Vegas, but. Now the Ravens.
You don't want to go? I like literally, like you've never been to Vegas,
You know what? The crab cakes and cream of crab soup. That sounds more appealing now. And maybe I'll change my mind.
To talk about this, the more pissed off I get about the whole Chad Steele thing, because I'd like to go to Vegas and broadcast next week because the Super Bowl's fun. But we're going to do a cup of Super Bowl.
We're going to have
fun. We're going to be doing this forever. We're going to have fun, and we're going to talk baseball. We're going to talk about let's begin the Cup or Super Bowl week here. Since we may do a segment a little later on in the week here, but let's do Radio Row week here. Let's not talk about the Pro Bowl and Team Ray Ray and Team Dion or whatever the hell they're doing this year. This is going to be an off season of tumult around here, and we can be nice about it or whatever, but they didn't get it done. We had 65,000 people leave the stadium pissed off and lighter in the wallet, a little less lighter in the wallet than it would have been spending 15 grand in Vegas next week. Even if it wasn't going to cost me 15 grand to send you, I still wanted to send you. I wanted to have our promotion next week be a part of all. I mean, the reason I picked Pappas on Friday and State Fair on Thursday was like, by the end of the week, it's going to be crazy around here. You know what I mean? And all next week, we're going to sit and do this promotion for the Maryland Food Bank and promoting 100 different charities, which is really the topic of what we're doing next week in my own little Jerry Lewis way. But like every single conversation is going to be, they didn't get it done. They didn't get it done. Lamar choked. What did they do? The offense wasn't good enough. But in the near short term, the band's about to break up. And much like when Brian Billick gave that famous speech in Tampa, now 23 years ago, crazy, that we'll never be together again. It's never going to be like this again. This is the sad part where you go watch them clean the lockers out this week, but figure out who's played their last game in a Raven jersey. Yeah. And I'm assuming Ronnie Stanley has. I'm assuming Beckham has. I'm assuming Patrick Queen has. I mean, let's go down the list. I'm just getting the party started. But that's really where we are, and I'm pretty sure Mike Macdonald's called his last game as a defensive coordinator.
Yeah, since you mentioned his name, I won't belabor it, but Stanley's still under contract, and you look at that, there's still a very good chance he's going to be playing for the Ravens next year, but I think we're going to be talking a lot about exit strategy there, in terms of, in the same way that the Ravens drafted Lamar Jackson when Joe Flacco was still their quarterback. So, but you just said it. Look, players come and go. I mean, that's the nature of the beast in the NFL. And you view it more through the lens of tumult when you lose the way that you did on Sunday, and there's all this disappointment. But I think in the immediate future, what's going to happen with Mike Macdonald, who, before the locker room had even cleaned out on Sunday after the game, I mean, there were already reports, even before the game, about him interviewing with Seattle, about him interviewing with Washington. I think Mike Macdonald is very attractive to these teams. I think even some of the teams that ultimately went elsewhere, probably it was a factor that, there's, when your team's still playing and you're not quite as accessible from an interview standpoint, that's a factor. Way back when with Marvin Lewis, that was a factor 23 years ago. Why he wound up being a Ravens defensive coordinator an extra year. Compared to what everyone thought. But what's going to happen with Macdonald? Anthony Weaver is still drawing interest in terms of potentially being a head coach candidate. Denard Wilson on their defensive backs coach, who came over from Philly and was a big part of why their secondary held together. Didn't just hold together, but played so well, despite the fact that Marlon Humphrey missed roughly half the season. Marcus Williams missed about a quarter of the season, and they didn't skip a beat. So, I think Denard Wilson, there's a good chance you're going to see him get a defensive coordinator job, unless maybe he becomes a candidate to become the Ravens DC if Macdonald's hired away. So, there are always moving pieces to this, and there's always change. And I think we need to be careful not to be too fatalistic about this, because this isn't post 2001 breakup. This isn't post 2012 kind of breakup. The Ravens, they're going to have their challenges from a cap standpoint, but it's not cap jail where they're going to have this massive purge. I think a lot of it's just going to be, some guys that are free agents like Patrick Queen. Go down the list of guys that we've talked about and we'll continue to talk about in the coming days and weeks, because we're still a month and a half away from the start of free agency. But what's going to happen? What's going to happen with Matabike? Are they going to get a long-term deal done with him, or are they going to use the franchise tag? What does that mean for their cap? So your change is inevitable. And that's why it is so frustrating for this football team being the number one seed, being in a position where the Bengals with Burrow this year, we know what happened there. The Chiefs being down, other teams in the conference not living up to expectations. I mean, the Ravens were the team, that it came through them in Baltimore, and they let Kansas City come in and take it from them. And I think that's where you look at this thing and you say, okay, what are we going to be able to do to break through? What are we going to be able to do to get over the hump? And I think what's so frustrating about this, Nestor, there is not a darn thing they're going to be able to do during the regular season that's going to give us any indication that next January is going to be any different. I mean, it's just the truth, right? I mean, they already were the best team in football. I mean, I guess they could go 17-0, but even then you would be said, okay, they better win it all.
Patrick Mahomes is going to be coming here the third week of January.
Right,
you better
right.
I
mean, it's just, and that's where, there is an element to this where, and the Ravens would never say this publicly, but I think there is an element to this where you kind of throw your hands up and say, what's it going to take? How do we take the next step? And some of it is just experience. I will continue to use this example because it's a very relevant example, because it's one of the greatest quarterbacks in NFL history. Peyton Manning didn't win a Super Bowl until year 9. Think about that. He was a rookie in 1998, and it wasn't until 2006, when they famously came into Baltimore, or infamously, I should say, and knocked off the Ravens in the divisional round, and then they finally got it done the following week and go to a Super Bowl and win it. So, beyond just saying experience, but that's where I keep coming back to. Patrick Mahomes isn't going anywhere. The Chiefs, okay, Andy Reid could retire, I guess. He's going to retire at some point, so there is that element to it. But Mahomes is a year and a half older than Lamar. He's not going anywhere. And by the way, the conversation we're having right now is the exact same one happening in Buffalo. It's the same thing happened in Cincinnati, although to their credit, the Bengals did beat Mahomes in the AFC Championship a couple years ago. But this is the reality for the entire AFC. And for the Ravens, it's a matter of what do you do to get over the hump? And, to bring it back to what I mentioned with Mike Macdonald, you are in a position now where, unfortunately, you're going to sustain, you're going to have to endure some attrition with their defense, whether it's coaches, you're starting with your coordinator, or, some of the personnel that's inevitably going to depart. Now, guys can step up. You'll draft guys. Doesn't mean I think that their defense is going to fall apart. Far from it. But boy, it was just such a formidable unit. And even on Sunday, I mean, as much as those first couple drives were frustrating as what, especially that second drive, this couldn't get off the field on third down. And I even asked Roquan Smith about it. And, again, it was one of those deals where they made them go the length of the field. They made them convert third down after third down after third down, but they did it. And it was a very frustrating feeling for them. But, this defense matching or duplicating what it did this year, next year and beyond, that's going to be a tall order, just because, from a roster building standpoint, coaching standpoint, all that. So again, we come back to that same theme of this feeling like this was their best chance. And that's not to say they won't have chances. It's not to say they won't break through even next year. Who knows? But it's just very frustrating, a very bitter way for such a fun, such an impressive 2023 season to come to an end.
Luke Jones is here. He is Luke at WNST.net. And we, of course, if there's any breaking news in regard to coaching, you'll get it first on the WNST text service. We're going to make it through this week to get to the Cup of Super Bowl week next week. And, part of this would be who's staying, who's going, where are they going? You talk about Ronnie Stanley, maybe not so fast in regard to that. The way these teams are put together, and the Kyle Van Noys and the Jadeveon Clowneys that come on and the Odell Beckhams that get signed in the offseason or not, the capology of all of this is about to change dramatically. And I think from the fan base's perspective, who don't stay up with salary cap guy on the internet and all that stuff, the notion of how much money Lamar got and what that 20%, 18%, 21% against the cap is going to look like, let alone all this other money that's going out the front door. The biggest thing is when you give Marlon Humphrey that money and you give Ronnie Stanley that money and they don't play to that level, you need a Zay Flowers or a Kyle Hamilton to really play above their pay grade, right? Or a Tyler Linderbaum. I mean, they're getting great value out of most of their draft. Eric's been very, very good on draft day the last 2 years, which is how you're hosting the AFC Championship game, right? And very, very good on off the field personnel and the right veteran guys that John can deal with, whether it's the Maulettes or whether it's the Darbys. I mean, Roquan Smith, there's a bunch of dogs in there. I'm not in the locker room. First time in my career that I don't know any of these guys. I sense the professionalism of what Van Noy imports from a Belichick team, what a Roquan Smith just has in his soul, what a Patrick Queen learned at LSU and brought here, and some of that bravado and mouth he had early in his career really went away, and he's become kind of a humble warrior. Patrick Queen strikes me as a guy that's going to get a lot of money and pick a good spot and be playing against the Ravens in January. I don't think he's a guy that's just going to go cash in and play for some crappy team to take a deal. I think he's a guy that's going to be able to pick a place he wants to go and win.
Yeah, well, and he's earned that, right? I mean, we talked about this. I mean, going all the way back to OTAs, we talked about this with the contrast, the juxtaposition of him and J.K. Dobbins, and how Queen approached it, and how Dobbins did, and putting aside the injury, because that was unfortunate for J.K. Dobbins. I don't wish anything like that on any player, but just how he handled his business leading up to, and including the start of training camp, how Queen did it, is very businesslike. But yeah, that's not. And to be clear, this isn't going to be a teardown, but you're gonna have some attrition here, and that's not to say that Eric DeCosta won't go out and sign next year's version of Jadeveon Clowney and Kyle Van Noy. Heck, one of those guys could be back. I'm guessing probably not both, but one of those guys could be back, in the same way that Justin Houston hung around for a couple years, and that worked out pretty well. But the Ravens knew the right time to say, okay, bye-bye to Justin Houston, and that was the right decision because he wasn't very good this year for Carolina. And
same thing with Calais Campbell too, right? I mean, they make good. Yeah. They squeezed their juice out of their 30-something players and bid them adieu, literally.
Yeah,
I mean, what they did with Suggs in the end, and Ed Reed too.
Calais Campbell had a good year for Atlanta, but was he a $7+ million player that the Ravens were going to have to make him to stay? No, he wasn't anymore. So, I mean, this is part of it. It's a year-to-year roster building. You always have your short-term roster building, and then you have your 5-year plan. The 5-year plan now is more challenging from the standpoint of you have Lamar on this big contract, and there are other big money players. And to your point, it becomes more problematic when you have Ronnie Stanley, who's under contract for what he is next year and is not that kind of player anymore, or Marlon Humphrey, who I'm not ready to put in the same exact category as Stanley, because Humphrey had been a durable player until this year, but now it's a case of, okay, what's his value? Where is he? Is he coming back and being the same guy and being the top guy? The way their defensive system works now, I mean, part of what made the Mike Macdonald system so effective here over the last couple of years is it's kind of moved the Ravens away from needing those elite press man coverage kind of cornerbacks. And they did so well, even with Brandon Stevens, who was a great story this year, but he's not Marlon Humphrey or Marcus Peters in his prime.
Not a blue chip player.
He's good, but he was good. He was above average, and that's a credit to him. But the point is the way the system morphed from Wink Martindale to Mike Macdonald is you put those corners on an island a little less often, right? So, it kind of put a little less pressure on them. I mean, the shining stars of the Ravens defense was, up the middle, with what they do. And that's not going to change because you still have Roquan Smith and Kyle Hamilton and Marcus Williams, and you hope Justin Madubuike, presumably, at least on the franchise tag this coming year. So, but they're going to have to make shrewd decisions. They're going to have to figure out who they want to try to keep. They're going to have to draft and replace some of their depth. They're going to need guys like a Trenton Simpson, for example. We've spent all the time talking about Patrick Queen. They drafted Trenton Simpson in the 3rd round last April to be the heir apparent. He needs to be ready. And they'll probably bring in a veteran, Josh Bynes kind of a guy to elevate the floor there a little bit just in case. But, young guys have to take over. The draft, which is always important to the Ravens, it becomes even more important now when you have a $260 million quarterback. In the same way that it's critical for Kansas City, it's going to be more critical for Cincinnati now with Joe Burrow. It's going to be very critical for Buffalo when you look at some of their, the decisions they're going to have to make and what their cap picture is looking like now. I mean, that's the cost of having a franchise quarterback. I mean, you got to pay him because what's the alternative? And you have to fill out your roster drafting really well and making shrewd, good, savvy signings where you're going to get surplus value like they did with Clowney and Van Noy this year. So, That's not going to change, and that's going to continue to be the goal, and they'll continue to do those things, but not every guy's going to hit. For every Clowney and Van Noy, we can also point to they traded for Yannick Ngakoue 3 years ago, right? And that was not much of a factor for them. So, you have guys that you're going to whiff on from time to time. That happens. No one bats 1,000, but that's why it's so frustrating because of where this team was, what they had been up until Sunday, even what their defense did on Sunday. Like I said, I'll continue to say it. If you tell me before the game, I think if you told anyone in Baltimore, not just Baltimore, if you told anyone, period, that the Ravens hold Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs to 17 points, I don't think you're going to find anyone saying that they lose that football game. So that's where it is frustrating that they had this kind of a defense overall. And I get it. They didn't play perfect football on Sunday, and they gave up the third down play at the end where the offense could have gotten the ball back with 2 minutes to go. And maybe we're having a very different discussion if that happens. But, overall, I mean, it was a hell of a defense. And, it is going to be, there is going to be some attrition. There are going to be some challenges as far as who you're going to try to keep. They've extended Michael Pierce. They signed him to a modest extension, so he'll be back. We know the guys under contract will be back. I mean, you have Roquan Smith and Kyle Hamilton. Those are the two guys that I really view. Matabike we'll see because you got to sign him long term, right? But those are the two anchors. Those are the guys that this defense is going to revolve around. And I think Hamilton might even go beyond, above where Roquan is over the next couple of years, because that's how great I think he is as a football player. So you've got an amazing foundation that's still going to be there. But if Mike Macdonald is off to Seattle or off to Washington, and the next time you and I talk, we might have clarity one way or the other about that. But, if he departs and you lose some of the guys that you're going to lose, depth players, someone like a Geno Stone, for example, who has more than earned a starting opportunity elsewhere, and we'll see how it plays out for him, of course. But, you're going to lose some of those guys. So
what about Zeitler? What about Moses? What about, guys that are 30-something guys that have been nice pale pieces to this, but I think it's a running back issue. It's not a system issue. It's certainly not. I don't think it's even a personnel issue. They didn't try to run the ball on Sunday against the football game. Literally.
Yeah, I mean, to pivot over to the offensive side since you brought it up. I mean, I think Zeitler is a really interesting one. Look, did Kevin Zeitler still play at a really high level this year? Yeah, he absolutely did. But you do look at age. You look at the fact that, and some fans are going to cringe at this, but I'm going to bring it up. You do have Ben Cleveland, who, when he has actually played, has actually done a decent job. And I think they were really encouraged by the step forward he took this year, because he stayed on the practice field and actually was able to develop. He didn't play a whole lot. And when he was called upon to play, for Zeitler, it wasn't a whole lot, but, Zeitler missed a couple games at the end of the season. You have to make some tough decisions, and there are some times where you have to roll the dice on a young guy because
they feel like they have the replacement for Queen, right? Or at least they got a sense of that a couple of weeks ago, right?
I mean, I think they're very hopeful. I think they're optimistic. You can't pay two off-ball linebackers what Roquan Smith is making and what I expect Queen to command, which I think is going to be similar to what CJ Mosley got 4 years ago. 5 years ago, I guess it was now. Hard to believe that's been 5 years, right? But I think Queen's going to get a $75-80 million contract.
Patrick Queen will be one of the top 5 free agents in the market this offseason.
Across the NFL?
Across the NFL. He'll be a first day, $75 million. That's he'll be a serious guy. I don't know that the dogs will be out the way they were with Rex and Pet and chasing Bart Scott or whatever, but yeah.
I think what you're going to see, I don't know if he's top 5, because for one thing, I don't have the free agent list in front. I sound like John Harbaugh. I don't have that list in front of me, but he's certainly going to get paid. And I think what's interesting, and look, guys like me were talking about this a few years back, even go back to when they drafted or when they let CJ Mosley go and when they drafted Patrick Queen, talking about off-ball linebackers and positional value and how the NFL had swung so far in the direction of saying that position is devalued. I think the Ravens and the 49ers have shown that position is still valuable.
Well, now, you got to guard Travis Kelce.
Right. Well, and But the cynic would say, well, you had Roquan Smith and Patrick Queen, and well, Travis Kelce still had over 100 receiving yards in the AFC Championship. So not to blame
And you had
those two
Kyle
guys
Hamilton too,
individually.
by the way. You
Sure,
put that in there
sure.
too.
Yeah. So some people would say that might be an argument against what I'm saying.
Well, they couldn't
here,
stop
but,
Gronkowski either forever, right? I mean, that kept Brady alive the last 7 or 8 years. Without Gronkowski, he wouldn't have been much.
And let's also acknowledge, you generally speaking, even the best teams don't have answers for Hall of Fame players. I mean, look at the Ravens, right? I mean, their defense was the best in the league this year, and we saw what Patrick Mahomes did on the first 2 drives, and we saw what Patrick Mahomes did on 3rd and 9 to end the game. I mean, it's just, sometimes you just have to say he's better. He's the best. We hate it, but it's true. But I think for Patrick Queen, this is going to be a sweet spot for him, I believe, because I think you're going to see teams start to recognize, okay, maybe we don't need Roquan Smith, but we can't have 2 late round guys or a late round guy and a journeyman playing our off-ball linebacker spots. I think people were starting to see that, okay, that position's a little more important than maybe we thought 5 years ago, especially with, how the NFL's morphing and evolving. So he's going to get paid. Go down the list. I mean, it's, you mentioned Zeitler and Morgan Moses. Moses is under contract for 1 more year. I'll throw that out there. So, we'll have to see what happens there. But Zeitler, I think it's tough. I think all things being equal, you'd love to have him back for another year. But knowing some of the attrition you're going to have at some other spots and knowing where your cap situation is that, do they have to make a difficult call to say, you know what, this is one of those times where we're going to part with a guy a year early rather than a year late. And we're going to have to roll the dice on Ben Cleveland, and we'll look to draft another guard. And, we'll hope that Saleh develops in the offseason, and we'll have to see how that plays out. And with the understanding that, if we need to, we can go out and get a guy in June or in August, so, we'll have to see how it plays out. I think Zeitler wants to stay. I think he wanted to talk extension last offseason, from what I understand. And I think the Ravens were, kind of, let's wait. I think that's how they approach that, which I can understand for a guard on the wrong side of 30.
They've already got money into the tackle on the wrong side of 30.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and not that Kevin Zeitler is going to command anything remotely like that, but yeah, I mean, you're in a position already with your left tackle where, from a cap standpoint, it's going to be very difficult to maneuver out of that this year if you absolutely are set on doing that. That's why I said I think their best approach is probably going to be to try to identify your left tackle of the future, and maybe he plays one of the other spots on the O-line for a year, and that's how you approach it. And then, he moves into left tackle if Stanley gets hurt, or if you move on at the end of next year. I mean, who knows? I mean, there's so much to talk about, so many possibilities there. But yeah, Kevin Zeitler at age 33. Again, I love the guy, and I think he had a really good year, and I think it's a shame that he's never gotten the Pro Bowl recognition that I think he's deserved over the course of his career. I think he's always been that guy that's probably the 2nd or 3rd or 4th best guard in the AFC, and it hasn't worked out for him. For years, he was behind someone like Marshall Yanda, and now he's behind Joe Tooney and Quentin Nelson in Indy, and go down the list of some of the very best. He's on that list, but hasn't gotten that recognition. But is he going to be a priority for them to keep? I mean, it's
where they spend their money and where they spend their draft capital.
They got to be judicious about it.
And the draft capital is, you're picking 29th now or whatever, right? 30th, whatever they're going to be.
30th.
Right?
Yeah, it's going to be 30th. So, I mean, that's part of it. Now, some of these guys that depart, they'll get comp picks for, but keep in mind, those will be comp picks for next year. So it's not, again, I want to be clear, Nestor, this is not 2001 cap purge. This is not 2012 cap purge. It's not anything like that, close to that. And there are ways to maneuver the cap with void years. We saw the Ravens start to use voidable years this past offseason when they had rarely ever used those. I think you're going to see that continue. And there are ways to continue to kick the can down the road. So they're not in deep, what, but it is going to be more challenging moving forward. And they do have quite a list of free agents. We haven't even mentioned, we've mentioned it in passing, but Jadeveon Clowney, he was so huge for this defense. Do you try to bring him back? I'm guessing he's going to want some real money after playing on a very team-friendly deal. I'm guessing there's going to be more demand for him after the year that he just had, despite the fact that he's another guy on the wrong side of 30. So, do you try to keep him, or do you go the route that they've gone the last few off seasons, which for the most part has worked out pretty nicely for them, which is wait it out and sign someone in August? I mean, Clowney worked out, Houston worked out a couple years ago, Van Noy worked out, but as I mentioned, the Ngakoue trade didn't work out 3 years ago, and Jason Pierre-Paul was fine, but not really a guy that moved the needle for them.
Mata Pekka played around here. I mean, Deshaun Jackson, but I mean, they have no problem bringing people in,
Sure. And some of them work out and some of them don't work out so well. I mean, that's how it works. I mean, no, again, if you're going to expect perfection, you're going to be left wanting. I mean, no one's going to be perfect, but the Ravens have done it at a pretty darn high level, with some of these veteran players, and they're going to have to continue to do that. And the good thing, and this is where I will put a more positive spin on it, is this team, when Lamar has been healthy, has been right there. Other players want to come and play with Lamar Jackson. Just listen to how Dalvin Cook talked about Lamar Jackson. Listen to how Kyle Van Noy talked about Lamar Jackson. Listen to how Clowney talked about Jackson back in August. So that's a heck of a selling point for them, but it does still come back to the dollars, the cap number, all of that, which is going to become more challenging now as we move forward. Not impossible. That's not a cop-out. It's not an excuse. Any team with a franchise quarterback that has paid that franchise quarterback is dealing with the same exact situation, but it does become more challenging now. And that, again, that's why you looked at the way this roster was constructed, with the depth that they had, the coaches that they had. They're going to lose some of that this offseason. So doesn't mean they're done. Doesn't mean they're in deep trouble. Doesn't mean that they won't be back in the AFC Championship next year. But it keeps coming back to, boy, this just felt like such a great opportunity for this to be their time. But it wasn't. We could talk about this being their year all we want. It wasn't, because if it had been, well, they'd be playing in Vegas in 2 weeks. And instead, we're going to be talking about it from afar, enjoying a crab cake and a cup of cream and crab soup.
All right. Are you cream or are you Maryland crab? Are you half and half? Where you go?
You know what? The 50-50 is something that I was turned on to like 4 or 5 years ago.
It's a new thing for me too. I remember that. And I always remember, if you've been eating crab soup your whole life, you remember the first time somebody said, "Yeah, why don't you mix it?" And I
thought it sounded disgusting the first time that someone suggested that to me. Just the idea of the cream, a good cream of crab soup with the tomato. I was just like, nah. But it was my sister, actually. She's like, I know it sounds gross. Try it. Trust me. I love it. So one or the other, I've always been more of a cream of crab guy, but I've really become a 50-50 guy over the last few years.
I'm really worried if I don't have you around how I'm going to go to the bathroom next week. Doing live radio. We're doing live radio for the first time in 10 years. We'll be on live from 9 until 5. I'm calling it a marathon. We're doing 40 hours of live radio to promote 100 local charities and folks doing good stuff in the community. We're calling it Crabcake Row, because we're not allowed on radio row, because we're not a real radio station, and I'm not a real radio owner, and I'm not a real journalist anymore. Call Chad Steele. He'll be getting a letter from me next week as well. Eric DaCosta has earned himself a little letter from me too, a little Dear Eric letter for him. So you'll be on the lookout for that next week. Meanwhile, we will be doing Crabcake Row, a cup of soup or bowl of soup. So we're not going to go to the Super Bowl, but we're going to have a cup of soup or bowl. 5 locations, starting on Monday at Faidley's downtown. Tuesday, we will be at Costas in Dundalk. Wednesday at Coco's in Lauraville. Thursday at State Fair in Catonsville. Then on Friday, I have my Pappas shirt on right now. This one fits me real nice, too. It feels good. It feels like I could do some yoga, lift some weights, go to Planet Fitness, do something nice with this thing. It feels good. On Friday, we'll be at Pappas. I was hoping for a giant purple pep rally, and instead, it's just going to be me and Luke doing good work, charity work, talking about other teams in the Super Bowl and looking at pitchers and catchers reporting. Nice offseason for the Orioles so far, too. I am Nestor. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. Luke, you expect me to be in a good mood when the Ravens get eliminated like this? How do you want me to be?
I completely understand. And we haven't said this. My final thought, disappointed for everyone. I mean, Sunday, until the game started,
it was the biggest day in the history of the city.
It was special. I mean, you have to go back to the Orioles in the World Series, which 40 years ago. I mean, 40 years ago, 41 now, or it will be in October. So just disappointed. I had so many friends. I had people that mean a lot to me in my personal life. So excited about this. And it's disappointing when the team can't get it done. And look, the other team tries too, but disappointing. Like I said, this major 2006 Indy vibes, only they were one win away from the Super Bowl instead of two.
Well, I hope Steve Bisciotti didn't hear this piece because I didn't bleed enough purple and black in here, I guess, to warrant being at the Super Bowl next week doing our jobs. But instead, we'll be here doing our jobs, and we've done a great job around here covering the team. Traffic's up. We had Joe Flacco on last week. Lots of great conversations. This week, we had Marvin Lewis last week and Brian Billick. Brian's coming back on this week. Dwan Edwards is going to be here. Todd Heap's going to be here. We're going to be doing plenty of sort of post-mortem for a season that was a great ride, man. I mean, it produced an AFC Championship game in Baltimore that was a winnable football game. And I remember when John Harbaugh was still talking to me and still considered me a real media member. He he gave us a ride in his cab in Indianapolis, came by, sat with us, and said that he would never get over Billy Cundiff. I remember how morose that was. You can go up and watch that on YouTube after the Billy Cundiff kick that John came and spent an hour with us in Indianapolis 2 weeks later at the Combine, just working through it a little bit. And that was an AFC Championship game loss that he still hadn't won a Super Bowl. There was no guarantee that they were going to go back and do all the things that they did a year later that they did. So I would just say, from John's perspective and the organization's perspective, the organization has been through disappointments like this with this leadership, this group, to say, Bum Phillips, we knocked on the door this year. We'll kick it in next year, whatever that is. There has to be a belief in that because of the core of Roquan Smith and Kyle Hamilton and Lamar Jackson and the offense and Mark Andrews coming back and Zay Flowers emerging and young players on the come getting an opportunity, the Brandon Stevens and these players. So there's hope here, but there's also, the reality of how hard it is to do. So an AFC Championship game at home, and it didn't happen. So rough week around here. We will be doing purple therapy here this week. We will be doing charitable work next week with Crabcake Row and a cup of Super Bowl. And we really do hope that you come out and support the Maryland Food Bank, which I've learned they have local pantries in every neighborhood. So the stuff we're doing like Monday at Faidley's is staying downtown. The stuff we're doing at Costas and Dundalk, if you're bringing food over, that food's going to stay in the Dundalk, Essex East Side area. So, I like that. So I'm going to be learning about this as we go along. We're going to be talking baseball, football stuff. By next week, I'll try to have some fun and laugh a little bit. It's hard, especially for the folks who spent a lot of money and went down there on Sunday. So we're still here for you. I've been here from the beginning, 32 years. I was here beating on the door trying to get a football team around here so we'd have a day like Sunday that I could watch on television while Luke sits in the press box with our company name on it. I am Nestor. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking lost opportunities and Baltimore positive. Stay with us.